Hey everybody, welcome back to another fun-filled episode of Tom and Jesse Talk Movies.
Hey,
I'm Tom.
I'm Jesse.
Great. And today we are continuing the Die Hard talk.
Very exciting.
We will be talking about Die Hard 2, Die Harder.
What a title that was. That must have taken a good 30 minutes to think of.
I think so. And this one came out a couple years later in 1990. Directed by Rennie Harlan,
Hollywood
personal favorite of mine. And this one, I think we were both kind of looking forward to watching this one because, we're very familiar with the first film. And, this is a franchise both Jesse and I have, talked about a bit. And, I always said, 2 is one of the lesser familiar ones for me, probably 2 and 4. We both really love 3.
And 5.
Well, he loves 5. I was excited to watch this. I probably have seen it in full maybe one time years and years ago. Not being that far removed from watching the first film, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty excited to watch this one. I have a thing for late 80s, early 90s action films. This is the prime of Steven Seagal,
right?
Films like the Schwarzenegger, absolutely, yes. So, action movie. Right now, we're still in superhero phase, and I'm hoping that dies down soon because it's been 10 years straight. And so this is the height of action hunk guys,
right?
So, I was looking forward to watching this one. So, how was your viewing this time? When was the last time you had watched this one prior?
I probably watched this about a year and a half ago to 2 years ago. And I remember at the time, and, this is one of my favorite movie franchises.
Right.
At least 1, 2, I guess you could throw in there because it's pretty serviceable. And 3, it being, if 1 didn't exist, 3, Die Hard with a Vengeance would probably be one of my favorite action films. And it does.
Yeah.
It is one of my favorite action films. Even 4 it's tolerable, it's bearable,
it's watchable to an extent.
5 we won't talk about. 5 shouldn't exist.
No, it's bad.
Do you want to set the stage a little bit? Because this is one of the major faults that I have with this movie is about how convoluted the plot feels at times.
Yeah, exactly. We were discussing how they our biggest issue. We share the same opinions on this movie. We feel that it's too congested. It's convoluted. There's too much going on, and I don't know where to focus as a viewer. This one John McClane, Bruce Willis, returns, and his wife does as well. And he's picking up his wife Holly at the Washington. It's called the Washington International Airport, Dulles. On Christmas Eve, great setting for this, much like the first one. So already I'm like, oh, I'm on board. Okay, this sounds pretty cool. And, he's back, but then it turns out that there are some terrorists trying to hijack the airport and try to ground all the flights. So an incoming plane can land at the airport, and on that airplane is, a terrorist, Espinosa. Yes, and
who's a warlord who at one point the U.S. seemed to be in bed with.
Right, and I'm like, okay, this sounds pretty good because sequels to action films, I always felt how do we do that? The first movie we discussed previously, how iconic it felt, how fresh for its time, and how it still holds up to today. How do we do a sequel to that? So, they bring back some of the same actors, and, we have a different director this time, but it's the plot on paper, it sounds interesting, and I'm like, I'm for that. I'm, John McClane seems to face off with terrorists. Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm down. But the plot, as interesting as it sounds right there, it's just they do too much. And, you were saying
it just becomes incredibly complex, I feel like, at times, and focuses on almost the minutia of air travel and, traffic control at points. And there are moments where there's just so much exposition and so much explanation. I'm just like, I just want to see John McClane beat people up.
Yeah.
I don't need to know how an airport works or operates and the amount of detail that they go in at times. And it seems like there's too many characters. I understand what works about the first one is you had all these interesting characters. You had Argyle, the limo driver. You had Bonnie Bedelia's character. You had Reginald Bell Johnson, who returns very, very briefly, and he really, unfortunately, I wish he had a bigger role. You have Dennis Franz's character, who's the major character, who plays a burnt-out airport cop, and he is, yes, you can call him a protagonist, but he is so sort of antithetical to what a protagonist is, where he sees John McClane as the hotshot LA police detective. And John
McClane, I mean, he is.
Right,
but yeah, that's why we like him.
That's why he likes him. And instead of you know, when Bruce Willis, John McClane comes into the airport and he goes, you know, you might want to check out what's going on. Like, this could be something big. You have Dennis Franz's character just be like, it's BS, I know what I'm doing. Let me do my job. And there's so many instances in the film where something happens that's far bigger than just some sort of petty, you know, theft and John McClane says, this is going to be big. And you have Dennis Franz telling him, no, you're an idiot, John McClane. Let me do my job.
Yes.
And that happens to a fault where it's like you're ramming your head against the wall. And I get that.
It's cute for 5 minutes and then it overstays its welcome.
And then you have characters like Fred Thompson, the actor, who is in charge, I guess, of the airport operations. And his character really, I mean, I understand what the character is. I mean, he's the conduit, again, to Dennis Franz and to, you know, he's the one that's solely responsible for the operation of the airport. And okay, you know, the lights went out on the runway. Here's what we're going to do here. It was just so interesting. And Fred Thompson did absolutely nothing for me. In terms of the characters, I think that what they were trying to go for is they wanted to create these sort of disparate in terms of, you know, you have John McClane, who's that hotshot. You have Dennis Franz, who's the buttoned up type police officer. You had
takes John maybe a little too seriously.
Yes. And in doing so, unfortunately, a lot of these characters weren't that interesting. You gave William Atherton's character a larger role. He's stuck on an airplane with Bonnie Bedelia.
Yeah, wasn't doing it for me.
William Atherton being the reporter. You didn't need to give him more.
No,
you didn't need to give him more. And it's like this movie doesn't know what it wants to be, and it toes the line of being a comedy and action movie. It felt effortless in the first one.
Yeah.
And the pacing is a little bit off.
I totally agree. The pacing is all over the place in this movie. No, I agree with everything you said.
Do you feel similarly with the characters that they were just trying to hit home runs like they did with the first one, and in doing so, Fred Thompson's character, like what is he supposed to be?
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate different, diverse characters because that was done so well previously. But in the first film, each character had a purpose, and you know everything played out. In this one, each character has something to do, but I feel that there's no purpose. We don't need to follow them. I mean, you know, the first hour of the film, it feels like John McClane and the main bad guy played by William Sadler, who we both agree did a great job.
Really good.
It seems like they almost take a back seat. And because we're jumping from seeing his wife on the airplane, which is just circling because they can't land it, to this other, you know, local news reporter, the blonde woman, who's incredibly annoying, and honestly, you could cut her out of the movie.
There were a few characters I just felt like watching this where I'm like, you could do without them.
It's too much. There's not the charm isn't there. These extra characters were annoying, and I wasn't enjoying. A character doesn't have to be likable in order for you to enjoy them, but they're just so unlikable that you're like, can we get these people out of here? And you know, Dennis Franz as the head of security at the airport. He's very one note, and you know, obviously the role doesn't call for anything deep, but it's like his purpose is literally to stretch out and pad out the movie of let's be a fork in the road for John McClane, because John is 10 steps ahead of everybody else, and Dennis Franz is there to pull him back. That gets tired after 5 minutes, you know, and then Fred Thompson, useless. I mean, there was really no reason for him to get so much time. But then there's other characters that John meets up with. There's another character who works for there, but I'm drawing a blank on his name. But it's like we spend time. He goes with John on like a mission or whatever, and it was like
that was to establish radio communication with the airplanes again, because the terrorists were hijacking the radio frequencies. So
it just feels like we were jumping back and forth between so many different characters that we've lost our main characters here. And, you know, when we are introduced to Colonel Stewart, played by William Sadler, I'm like, he's a very interesting character. He has such a presence on the screen as a villain. I'm like, ooh, he's kind of menacing. I really like what's going on with this. And then he's absent for a lot of the film.
Right.
And I'm like, what are we doing here? That's what made the first film so great, is that like cat and mouse game between Hans Gruber and McClane. But anything, you know, the good stuff is, like, I think overall I say it's an okay film. It's not the worst, and it's not great by any means. I think it's watchable. There are some parts that are good. What stands out is Bruce Willis as John McClane. He is back. He's just as good as he was before. He has more good one-liners that I forgot.
And that's what made the first Die Hard great.
Well, yeah, his personality, John McClane, is that wisecracking hotshot, total ego, and I enjoy watching him get beat up, though, because it's like he enjoys it, but he's also really good at his job. So he brings this persona, this character to McClane, and you're like, oh, this guy totally exists. I get that. So that stuff is great. William Sadler's the bad guy is great. I love the setting of the airport. I think the idea of having terrorists take over an airport is cool. I don't know if I would have done it with like when I think hijack the airport, I think guys coming in and like literally everyone get down sort of thing. That would have been kind of rehashing the first movie a bit. I don't know what else they could have done. I mean, this plot is still good. The story is great. The idea is great, but the execution is not. We try to do too much. And if we pulled back some of these side characters and focused more on McClane going after the bad guy, I think this would have been a much better sequel.
Okay. You and I we share very similar opinions here. I do want to say there are some things that I like, and genuinely like, and I think that this is a film that's both referential, in that McClane is constantly alluding to, and the auxiliary characters are constantly alluding to Nakatomi Plaza, because John McClane has become a folk hero.
He's now infamous,
which is kind of fun. You know,
I have no problem with that. I like that.
And it was reverential in a way too, because this does feel like a natural extension of what the John McClane character would be. This doesn't feel it went in an unnatural direction where I'm like, oh, this isn't John McClane.
It's very consistent with the first movie.
It's consistent. I'm not the hugest fan of Rennie Harlin as a director, but I think that this film was really well done. And you talk about what like an extension of the first film. This does. It feels like it is just a direct continuation of what the first film was.
Yeah.
Looks-wise,
cinematography, the tone of the movie is very similar, and I applaud the director for that, because that's hard to do. Like, there are movies I've seen where it's like you watch 1 and 2 and they feel completely different, and they're in a different universe. This feels like we picked up right where we left off, and that's hard to do, and I think they really achieved that with this movie.
And it's a shame, kind of, because in my opinion the story is bogged down in so many ways by this needless exposition, by this ability, this desire to over-explain and over-explain. This is a movie that's like 2 hours and 4 minutes, and it feels longer than it is.
It does. There are parts like where, like the first half hour, I think is pretty solid. We jump right in, and that's fine. We've established our characters. Great, let's get to it. But then, like halfway through, we hit such a lull, and it's like things slow down so much, and I'm like, well, we're just wasting time here.
And you know, again, it's bogged down by some needless exposition, but you know, interpolated between this are some really good action scenes. There are some good shootouts. There's a good shootout in an airport terminal. There's, you know, a ridiculous part where an airplane is coming down, it's landing on the runway, and Bruce is like trapped in a gate underneath it, and he's got to like free himself. I mean, there are some memorable action scenes that I did recall.
The fighting, the hand-to-hand fighting towards the end was great when he was on the wing of the plane.
Absolutely. It's just that there wasn't enough of that. And
yeah, that's true. That felt lacking.
I honestly felt one of my big takeaways. Okay, so the last time I saw this movie, I wasn't all that impressed by William Sadler. I was this time. And I think that I had almost an unfair expectation because, you know, in one you have the immortal Hans Gruber, right?
Yes.
Played by Alan Rickman, who's sensational.
Mm-hmm.
And in 3, you have another really, really good villain, played by Jeremy Irons.
Yes.
But you know what? William Sadler, in terms of a villain in the franchise, he really holds his own.
Yes.
He's articulate and he's kind of menacing in his own way. Like you talked about, the way that you're introduced to William Sadler's character, Colonel Stewart, in the beginning, he's doing like naked yoga. And
it already sets the scene like, oh, this guy's nuts.
This guy's nuts.
I think that's great.
And he's great. Unfortunately, this movie, you kind of dilute the importance of Colonel Stewart by having this general that they have to, you know, facilitate to transport. They all want to take a plane, hijack a plane, and then go off to some tropical island.
Wow.
You don't. First of all,
it's like there's 3 bad guys. What's going on here?
And you see so little of the general. There's maybe like cumulatively 5 minutes of the general in there.
And isn't that crazy? Just to interject for a second, isn't it crazy how it's like there's so much exposition and buildup, and we have yet to even see this guy
at all.
And it's like when you do see him, you're like, oh, okay, he just seems like a regular guy.
I feel like if they sort of reconfigured this film in such a way where you made William Sadler the focal point, make him the villain, give me more William Sadler, give me more Bruce's one-liners, you could have had something here.
Yes. John Amos comes in halfway through the film, and he's fun, he does this stuff, but it's like by the time he comes in, it's like, wait, what's going on? Like, who are the bad guys? Like, it just becomes, it's congested. That's the best way I could say it.
It was a tedious experience almost in some ways where, obviously, again, you need to bolster the runtime. You need to make it 2 hours. You need to make a feature film. But there was so much of John being one step ahead of everyone else, and there was so much of Dennis Franz saying, like, get the heck out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. And Fred Thompson being like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. The bones of this movie, the foundation of this movie, were you could have made like a really compelling action film, and it's all right. If I would give it about maybe a 60-65% out of 100.
I would. To me, it's a C+ film. You know, it's okay. It's not bad. It's not great. It's okay.
Right. I give it points for you created one of the most seminal action films in Die Hard, the first one, and you'd probably look at that and go, you don't need a sequel. And they managed to make a watchable film. It's not great by any means, but there are elements of it that are compelling to watch. Bruce, like you said, is this prime Bruce Willis with his one-liners. It's just the characters. I like Bonnie Bedelia's character.
She's fine. I don't have a problem with them bringing her back. You can tell it's a little phoned in, not from her, but it's a little forced that she is back. You know, we cut to her. She's one of the many side plots, and it's like, okay, she's fine. She's enjoyable. That stuff I like when her and the flight attendants. You know, they kind of like they have some good lines together, but it's like, did his wife need to be in this one? I don't really know. I think it's just because audiences probably responded well to her because she was awesome in the first movie.
I understand why she was in there, and again, that was to amplify the tension that, oh my God, Bruce Willis's wife, you know, John McClane's wife is on an airplane that could crash at any moment because the fuel is running out on all the airplanes. No one can see the runway, but it was poorly executed in the sense that there was never really this sense of immediacy because I think so many different things were going on. John McClane has so little time to focus on, oh my gosh, my wife is up in the air. It almost took a back seat to, you know, how do we handle the terrorists and the general income. It was just so many different subplots, I felt like. They like cut down on it.
Exactly. And I was reminded this time of why I was never really crazy about this one. And people really like this one.
Critically, it was pretty well received.
I'm just kind of, I'm kind of surprised, you know, but.
In fact, you and I had this conversation before. I'm sorry to cut you off. Roger Ebert, you know, the eponymous critic.
Yeah, of course.
He was not a crazy fan of the first one. I want to say, you'll have to double check me, I think he gave the first film 2 stars, and he ended up giving the second film, or 2.5 stars. He ended up giving the second film 3 stars. I mean, he just praised it.
Yeah, I was never a fan of Roger Ebert.
Yeah.
I never, and it's not just because he has different opinions, but I never agree with what he says, and I always found him to be a little snooty.
Okay.
But yeah, so I can't say I'm surprised.
I want to bring something up that sets the stage because I'm very passionate about this franchise, as are you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in this film, in the third act, maybe the second act, and I blame this particular scene for the downfall of what the Die Hard franchise became.
Oh yeah.
So John is on the runway, John McClane's on the runway, and he encounters, William Sadler and his henchmen, and he takes cover in an airplane, in a commercial airliner, I think, and he John McClane locks himself in the cockpit because he's outmanned and outgunned, and the henchmen throw grenades into the window of the cockpit. And there's this ridiculous scene of about 6 grenades that it takes like 2 minutes for them to go off. And John straps himself in and he lifts off in an ejector seat. And you get this kind of ridiculous scene of him shooting up, and you have the camera focused on his face.
You got a bird's eye view shot.
Bird's eye view of everything exploding around him. And I'm like, this is where Die Hard really starts to become ridiculous and implausible.
Yeah.
One of the crazy things about the first film, if you think about it, is so much of the film is plausible. And unlike Rambo 2 and Terminator and all that, it's pretty grounded. It's grounded in reality. And I think you can make the argument in the first film, one of the most ridiculous parts, which, yes, it's ridiculous, but it's believable, is when John throws himself off the side of Nakatomi Tower, but he's kind of strapped in through like a fireman's hose.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not the worst,
right.
You're like, oh, okay, I get it. But then this is just like, it almost felt like it took me out of the movie for a second because it was not consistent with a lot of the rest.
Right, and unfortunately, not so much in the third film. The third film is great. I love the third film. There are certain scenes in there that are also a little bit ridiculous. But then
I don't remember.
Okay,
yeah, I don't remember.
There are a couple scenes that are really over the top. And then when you get to 4, 4 is just like, it's like Transformers with Bruce Willis with everything blowing up, and an F1 fighter jet is
4 and 5 feel so far removed from the
so far removed. And the scene in this movie with that ejector seat is like, for me, that was the start of, okay, John McClane is no longer an everyman. John McClane is now a superhero.
Yeah.
And what made the first film so great was that John McClane was that everything. He was a cop that got, embroiled in something that he wanted no part of, and he had to extricate himself from that sticky situation, and Bonnie Bedelia. And you start to lose me a little bit in the second one like that.
I agree. That's perfect.
Real quickly, I do think it was very admirable, again, where you had like the closed quarter setting, almost like Nakatomi. You're kind of trapped in an airport for the most part. That works for me. You see in the third film where you have this great expansive New York City, which you talk about sometimes settings being a character. New York City is
perfect that it's New York City and not like
right. But that also set the stage where, okay, now we're gonna move away from just being in one sort of contained location. So I like that they did that in the second one. And like you said, it's Christmas time. It's very evident that the terrorists chose this particular airport because they know that the security is a little bit understaffed, and they know, based on Dennis Franz, that they're a little bit incompetent. So I like that they play into that. You had good elements here. You had ingredients that you could have made a great film. And unfortunately, what's frustrating about it is because it's just bogged down by so much exposition, there's that fatigue. I'm just like waiting for the next action scene because there are great action sequences in this film. It could have been better than it was, sadly.
I completely agree.
It's watchable, and it is something I would rewatch because then I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of get why I thought this movie's okay. You know, it's fine. But it's just like, if this movie had to exist for 1 and 3 to exist, I'm fine with it. It's not a bad movie by any means, but it's just kind of, it's forgettable.
It is.
Yeah.
So. It is. It's a shame, but all right.
Wow.
I think that wraps up our talk about Die Hard. I actually want to, on my own, watch the third one, you know. Maybe 4.
You know what's funny? Because my initial impression of 4, I don't remember if I saw it when it came out in theaters, but 4 I loved when I first saw it.
Yeah.
And then watching it maybe, again, I went back about a year and a half ago and rewatched the Die Hard films. 4 is just so over the top.
It feels so different from the rest. Like 4 is the definition of your forced Hollywood studio movie. And I remember Justin Long being super annoying.
Yes.
And Timothy Olyphant, I like him, but not in that movie. He's not, I don't think he fits the bad guy part in that. Maggie Q was great.
In fact, she should have been the main villain.
Should have been the main villain. She's great. I remember the elevator scene being really good.
Kevin Smith does really nothing for me, and I like Kevin Smith.
No, I agree. And then 5 is just as a travesty.
Terrible film, but I don't think we have enough time to get into that.
All right. Comments, questions, concerns, please contact us at csprograms@cshlibrary.org. We will see you in January.
Yeah, look forward to it.